welcome to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. And it was another interesting week in real estate in Barrie and Simcoe County. Do you have any thoughts on that, Arif?
Yeah, Mike, absolutely. I certainly have some thoughts. And the first thing that came to mind was, boy, oh boy, if you're planning on being a part of this market right now, more than ever, our favorite saying, make sure you've got good people around you. Make sure you've got a great team, including a solid realtor, a solid mortgage broker, speak with your lawyer, all these things. Make sure you're prepared when you're going into that transaction, because there is so much information out there to distill, and you want to make sure that you are, in fact, distilling that information correctly. So, Mike, what's new in the real estate world? I think a report just came out. Yes,
the last week, the CREA stats for the area, well, for right across Canada, but they're broken down by board. And through the Barrie District Association of Realtor, the statistics for March. And these are literally page upon page of data. Some people love that. Other people just puts them to sleep. I like to just kind of pluck from that the numbers that matter the most relevant. And that first one is always average sold price. And the average sold price of a Barrie and area home for the month of March was $737,000, and that's up 3.3% from the month previously.
Yeah, Mike, I want to just take a pause on that and digest that a little bit and just think for a point of reference. If memory serves me correctly, 2 years ago, that number would be about 465.
I'm thinking we were probably down in around there. I know it's up 33% according to the stats here from March of 2020. So that's a big jump. And homes are still selling in the month of March anyways. They sold for, on average, 10% more than they listed for. So they're listing ambitiously and still selling for over list, with all of the bidding wars that are continuing to take place on homes. And I keep saying, and I remain hopeful, that we're going to hit a point where inventory levels come up, and we see fewer and fewer of these multiple bids and drivers that are pushing prices up higher and higher. And I'm hopeful, optimistic that by midsummer to late summer, we're going to see a more balanced market. But time is going to tell.
I think that's a fairly accurate statement to make. And I think if we, again, dissect your statement there just a little bit, I think the important takeaway is I don't believe we're going to see the average house price drop anytime soon. I do believe that we will see a bit of a relaxed atmosphere with regard to the multiple bidding scenario. Yeah. And let's just take a look at that real quick, if you will. Remember, I'm always one who likes to dissect what I see out there. When you see the little sign on top of the sold sign that says sold for over asking, or you see a realtor promoting their sale over asking on social media, well, we all know that there's a strategy or a tactic, for lack of a better word, out there that is start the process low and allow the piranhas to go to town on that listing. And of course, it will bid up, and of course, it's going to sell over asking price. Yeah. That's not necessarily a great feat on behalf of any one particular person. That's just baiting the market and letting the market.
It is. And there's debate over whether that's right or wrong. It's not illegal. And the argument is, if you're a realtor representing a buyer, that's going to work against their ultimate goals. If you're representing the seller, you're ideally hired to get them the highest and best dollar for the home. So
and that's exactly it.
It's hard to go back to your seller.
If your skin is too thin that you don't like the fact that was a technique, a sales technique that somebody used, then maybe that's something you have to revisit yourself. Yeah. I don't have a problem with it. It's just in terms of the interpretation of it, fair market value has always been determined by or explained as the price that a willing buyer and a willing seller are coming to an agreement on without any undue influence, and that's what the price is. End of story.
Yeah. And a seller's market is ultimately going to leave some buyers out of the game because it's too fast and furious, and the numbers may be too much for some people. And that's where a more balanced market, it invites more people to the table and
Mike,
creates a leveler playing field.
With that in mind, another piece of news that came out in the last couple of days was the federal government's intention to again manipulate the stress test. We all came to know the stress test a couple of years ago. And I actually am a fan of a stress test in theory. I'm not a fan necessarily of the government's current rollout or how they oversee, because I believe it's only first level and it doesn't go deeper into sort of the transaction or the implications that it has down the road. But theoretically, just for our audience sake, in case they're not overly familiar, a stress test is a benchmark over the contract rate or the Bank of Canada rate for which you must qualify for. In theory, that is that if rates go up, and you qualified at a higher rate based on the stress test, if rates do go up, you're not going to lose your home. You're still able to comfortably, within reason, make your payments. And so what the government did, made a statement last week, was that the market is too hot. They want to cool the market. They want to cool the frenzy. And without changing the benchmark rate, without changing the Bank of Canada rate, they figured that they could manipulate and slightly cool the frenzy by increasing the stress test, just to make sure that people aren't getting ahead of themselves.
Yeah. And to me, and there's the old saying, that's just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, because what is at the core of the problem? And it's not that interest rates are too low or that, the entry level to get into a home isn't difficult enough. The problem is we don't have enough housing inventory in the GTA, in all of Ontario, and across Canada. More people, our population is climbing faster than we're producing housing. And until our government gets behind creating incentives and motivations, and there's a list of things that they can and should be doing at all levels of government to try and stimulate our housing stock. And those things, some of them are happening. They're obviously not happening fast enough, but it really irks me to see, trying to find a solution by creating different problems or just shifting the problem over
Mike,
from
this area
over to the other.
I'm going to jump in real quick, and I'm going to suggest that we pick that up on the other side of a quick break. But I will tell you right off the bat, I am firmly in agreement with you on that one. And I don't like to always agree with you, but on this one I am. I think we can.
That's when the viewers drop off, when we start to agree with each other. So
we can look to the left, we can look to the right, we can look all around us for a solution. But the solution, certainly, in my opinion, I believe it, if I'm echoing yours, has been right in front of us the entire time. Let's go to break real quick, and let's come back and talk about that a little bit. You don't want to miss just a little bit of friendly banter with Mike and Arif on Rogers TV Barrie. We'll be right back with more Hitting Home. And welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif on Rogers TV. Barrie and Mike, before the break, in our first segment, we touched on a few things that are, well, in our opinion, affecting the housing market right now. Korea, the Canadian Real Estate Association just released its latest update in terms of inventory and housing prices and average house prices. I believe you said it refers to the 3-bedroom home at about $720,000. And
it was 7 and change, 734 actually.
Oh, excuse me, 734. All right, even better. And then we talked about some other influences. Obviously, the federal government wanting to inject some sense of calm, reduce what they're referring to as the frenzy. And instead of moving the lending rate or the Bank of Canada rate higher to do that, their solution so far is to increase the stress test. And again, we touched on that. The stress test is designed to ensure that if rates change or go higher, the average homeowner can still afford to stay in their home. But then we talked about, and something that we've been doing for a while, we said, well, listen, everybody's looking for solutions left, right, and center. And we believe, Mike, that there is a solution right in front of us, and that is that we need to affect the amount of.
We need more housing inventory.
Yeah. So what do we get into
there
some
are three,
of that, Mike?
Yeah, there are three primary issues with regards to housing in Canada, and it's high home costs, high rents, and homelessness. And all of them are tied to the housing inventory levels in the country. And again, there's much we can and should be doing. There's more we can and should be doing. Because I know there's costs affiliated with all of the things we may do, our government could do. But there's higher costs in not doing it over the long term. And it just gets frustrating. Playing around with qualification rules, it didn't work last time. It isn't going to work this time. All it's going to do is keep more and more people in the rental market, drive up rental prices, which will keep them even longer in that rental market. And again, there's housing inventory challenges that impact on that rental market as well. So let's get to the core and look at some of the things that could be done and should be done for housing inventory. There's a number of things.
Mike, let me jump in there, Mike. I have an opinion, and my opinion is one that's obviously going to rub some people the wrong way. But I always shudder when you see people in the glass towers, so to speak, or whether it's Parliament Hill or Queen's Park. And yes, by design, they are our elected representatives, but they certainly are only as good as the information that they glean from those who are boots on the ground, deeply embedded in certain industries. And so sometimes I shake my head and say, what were they thinking? Who were they really polling for insight and information when they made these decisions? And so we've got a wealth of lobby groups and interest groups in the Real Estate Association and the Mortgage Brokerage Association. But when you look at this, I mean, certainly some of the things that are affecting home price obviously would also be cost of goods and supplies, and lumber, for example, is skyrocketing.
Yeah.
So when cost of building materials is up 35%, that's got to come out of somewhere. The price of the house isn't going to go down. Right?
Well, that's a disincentive, but that's a small fraction of the contributing factors to this.
But I'm saying there are multiples.
Say that. Yeah, but the biggest one is red tape and the entry price costs for developers and builders for getting their permits, for getting approvals to build. That's a long, arduous process, and it discourages a lot of people. And government needs to take a good hard look at how can we streamline this at all levels to make it easier, and go even further, create some incentives that invite people to the table to want to participate in the home building industry. And
one of the things, Mike,
they're not doing that to any great degree.
I dug up an article. I shared it with you yesterday. Let's touch on that a little bit. I mean, the government keeps saying, we got to figure out, are we going to look at the Oak Ridges moraine? Are we going to start developing over our greatest farmland? Well, we know one thing is for sure, and that is that a number of years ago, I guess it's 3 years ago approximately, a report was released from the province that said that the federal government, all levels of government, let's be fair, but the federal and provincial government in particular are sitting on an incredible amount of surplus real estate. And
exactly.
That's real estate, Mike, as you well pointed out yesterday, so I'll give you the credit where it's due. You pointed out that surplus real estate is already serviced. And one of the things that delays the development is the time that it takes to get the infrastructure, being gas, water, electricity, all those types of services to a bare piece of land in order for development to actually take place. The government's sitting on a whole treasure trove of unutilized, abandoned real estate that could be turned into multi-unit and affordable housing, certainly for those who are most vulnerable and most in need of shelter.
Yeah, well, it breaks down into three areas, and it'll take me a minute to get through the three of them. One of them is precisely what you said. It's abandoned or vacant land, much of it owned by the government, much of it in the private sector. During our industrial heyday, there were lots of industrial buildings and sites. Some of that, the buildings have been cleared, but the land is contaminated, and there's a very high cost and process to getting those sites cleaned up and approved for residential building. Government can do a lot there in terms of bringing money forward and just streamlining the process for getting that happening. Government owns a lot of property. The bulk of the government business is done within the GTA for Ontario and for much of Canada. Those buildings were created for all of that government process to take place in a big city, because at the time they set these things up, that was needed. The technologies today allow us to spread near and far across Ontario. We need to break that up and move some of the resources of government into smaller towns. People want to live in smaller towns. We're seeing they want to move out. The costs to operate and manage infrastructure for government is far lower in these smaller towns than it is in the GTA. That's property that could be sold off and repurposed for residential. There's a lot of old factory buildings that are underutilized or not used at all, that are just costing money and sitting there and decaying. Put some money towards repurposing those. They've done it in some American bigger cities and create. So there's 3 areas without ever looking to go to the our environmentally protected lands. That's always a fear factor that gets thrown up by the media. Oh, we want to expand real estate, so that's the first place we're going to look. No, they're right within cities. There's a lot of underutilized, untapped lands or lands ready for repurposing. And this is something we really need to get going, and that's going to go a long way to resolving the problem of housing shortages in our province.
Mike, I think those are great sentiments, great thoughts. I certainly didn't want to interject. I love where you were going with it. When we come back from the break, let's talk about that paradigm shift that technology has allowed for, and let's talk about some suggestions that we may have that hopefully if one of our municipal or provincial counterparts or in government are listening, they might take it to their caucus and share the wealth of knowledge that you just brought to the table. So stick with us. On the other side of the break, we'll be back with more on Hitting Home with Mike and Arif on Rogers TV Barrie. Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif on Rogers TV Barrie. And before the break, Mike, you alluded to the fact that there's a paradigm shift. And I want to tip my hat actually to one of our elected representatives, just one at Queen's Park, and that's MPP and Attorney General Doug Downey. And the reason why I throw this comment out there about him is he's the one who in the last year, certainly with COVID, went full steam face to face with the fact that government and large, slow moving organizations need to embrace the paradigm shift. And that was around technology. And he basically said, I don't care what's been going on for the last 20, 30, 40 years. We have the technology. We just need to put it in our mindsets that we will embrace change, and we can shift the court systems, the justice systems, and all systems of government to embrace the fact that we can work from home. We can get out of these centralized silos that we work in, and we can allow technology to work in our favor. And Mike, that has a lot to do with exactly what you're talking about. You mentioned before the break that the government was the largest landholder, and they had all these offices and buildings and institutions that were built because there was no other option in terms of technology. So we needed these centralized locations. We don't need that anymore. So Mike, pick it up and take it away, because I know you've got somewhere else you wanted to go with that as well. Yeah.
Well, I like to refer to it as pants optional productivity. And, we can work from almost anywhere. You're at your home office. I'm at my home office at the moment here, and yet we're able to do this. And yet people are moving out of the city. So the demand for real estate is going to grow in smaller towns and cities. It's good on the overall to disperse all of that, but it puts added pressures on those smaller towns and cities. And I think a lot of people, they move to a smaller town or city with the kind of mindset that they're stepping almost into a Leave It to Beaver type of time era. And you buy that house and there's a vacant lot at the end of the street, and 2, 3, 4, 5 years after you've moved in, you learn, well, the developer who's been holding that, he's now ready to develop that property and put up townhomes or a 3-story walk up, and City Hall fills up with people saying this is the end of the world, this is good. And I understand it firsthand what it's like to have progress and development occur within your neighborhood. But the hypocrisy is you can't be arguing that home prices are too high and that there's too many challenges for within our affordable housing range within our community, but then also be fighting against building the solutions to that. Yeah, there's got to be a balance in there somewhere.
Well, let's throw in a little bit of kudos to one other person, and that's local representative Barry Ward, Deputy Mayor Barry Ward of the city of Barrie. And he is somebody who certainly pointed that out. I mean, this is not Barrie of the 1980s. This is Barrie of 2021. Yeah. Things have changed. I'm certainly not going to tell anybody that they need to leave Barrie, but the fact is we need to all embrace the fact that change is happening. Change has always happened, and it will always continue to happen. And this is really it is gentrification, though, as an opportunity that we've talked about. And in this segment, Mike, I wanted to touch on the fact that not only does do each of our levels of government have some surplus land available, whether that's boards of education or government institution and facilities themselves, but we also sit on brownfield. And you mentioned in the very first segment something that I thought was very important to really elaborate on right now, and that is that yes, there is a cost, and there's a cost of building, there's a cost of growth. Things are expensive, but in every other instance, when it's convenient, we talk about, well, what is the cost of inaction when it comes to the justice system, when it comes to making healthcare available to all,
social services, healthcare,
social services in general? What is the cost of inaction? And it's far greater than the cost of action. So when it refers to brownfields, Mike, let's talk about that. There's some remediation, but there are options that we could jumpstart the development of infill inside the urban boundaries and cleaning up for the good of the environment and cleaning up for the good of our neighbors to make housing available. We've got about 3 minutes, Mike, before we got to go.
It comes down to one thing, and it's cost incentives. That's the primary obstacle to soil reclamation, soil remediation that keeps those sites from being developed. But as real estate values go higher, then those costs become a little more palatable for those developers. So there's hope with that. But at the very most severe end of our housing crisis is the affordability issue and homelessness. And you have to consider that if you're going to advocate against development and building of multi-unit properties in your community, you're basically advocating against homelessness. And I know the homelessness tune. I've seen councillors recently want to refer to this as living rough. Well, I'm sorry, living rough is what cowboys do in Hollywood movies. If you're living in a tent by a pond in your downtown, you're homeless. And we need to create housing to take care of those people. I just wanted to get that out there. Just renaming it to make it less awkward to talk about by calling it living rough does not provide.
You're not fooling anybody. You're not fooling anybody. And by the way, let's also have this fact, by the way, Mike. You don't have to already be living in the tent by the pond. There are many people who are one paycheck away or one subsidy check away from being homeless. And so, when you close your eyes and envision that, it's not them. It might be your neighbor to your left. It might be your neighbor to your right. It may be the person in the mirror. There are people who are really stretching it and really wondering how they're going to make it through the month. So, this isn't here we go again talking about something that's popular to talk about. No, this is a very real conversation for a lot of people. We're going to have to wrap this up, Mike, but there are some suggestions. And I think in about 10 seconds, if you can nail it, there were some suggestions about deferring taxes and deferring or further incentivizing getting these properties to market. I think we got to do another show on it, though, Mike. So final thoughts, 10 seconds or less.
There's much that can be done. That's much that we have to do to tackle this problem, this challenge. And at the root of it is we need more housing available in Ontario. So
perfect. With that, I want to thank our audience for watching. We'll see you again on Hitting Home with Mike and Arif.